Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today we are going to have a short conversation about active listening. And admittedly, in a 30-minute or so window, we're not going to be able to get into every detail, every perspective, every idea, every behavior that different people or organizations associate with active listening. But what we are going to do is take a look at the traditional approach, the traditional concepts of active listening, and have a hot take free, reasoned discussion about how we can take some new considerations into engaging with people in scenarios where the relationship and or the outcome are important to us, and we might run into some resistance along the way. So for the world's briefest history lesson, the term active listening began gaining notoriety after a short book was published in 1957 of the same name by psychologists Carl Rogers and Richard Farson. The technique actually started gaining life the decade prior. The technique began development in the 1940s in Rogers' client-centered therapy practice, and he originally called it reflective listening, because his stated goal was to help people grow and change. And he felt that to do that, you had to show empathy, you had to refrain from judgment, you had to stay positive with them. So the popularity began to grow. It really took off in the 1960s and has since become the ubiquitous term for great listening, that everywhere you turn, if somebody's talking about listening to other people, they're talking about being a great active listener, which can be good, but also leaves us some opportunities for conversation. So first, let's take a moment to acknowledge the context that this concept was born in. It was born in a therapeutic environment. It was born in a scenario where psychologists were having conversations with people who sought them out for therapy. Now, I know what I'm about to say is painting with very broad strokes and is not always true. In many of these scenarios, the people who were sitting down and having conversations with Rogers and Farson were there for a reason. They were there willingly, they were open to the process, they were openly participating, and they realized that they had an opportunity to grow and change, and they were looking for it. So often in these types of conversations, psychologists will take the time to reflect back what their patients are saying and what their patients are feeling in order to help their patients continue to explore that experience, be okay showing vulnerability, open up doors that haven't been opened before, share information or ideas that haven't been shared before, and essentially lead themselves to the correct solution that they will commit to and move forward in their life. That scenario sounds like the perfect application for active listening. I'm going to make sure that I appear that I'm fully involved, because if I am, you will talk more. Great. Completely agree with that. As I reflect back to you what you're thinking and feeling, it will help you experience it in greater detail, which will lead you to commit to a solution that you realize you need to find, which is why we're having these conversations to begin with. Again, drastic summarization, it doesn't always work that way. Quite often it does. So if we start to think about the core behaviors that are associated with active listening, and again, over the years, this concept has changed. People have added some different things, but at its very core, when people talk about actively listening, really what they talk about is maintain appropriate eye contact. That could be appropriate culturally, that could be appropriate contextually, certainly for the personalities involved, but maintain appropriate eye contact. Maintain open body posture. Give intermittent encouragers. Those encouragers might be nonverbal, head nod, palms to the sky. They might be verbal. Yeah, tell me more. Just short verbal encouragers in order to keep people talking. Certainly, short paraphrasing is encouraged to at least try to give the idea that we are understanding, we are listening, and we want to hear more. The concept of reflecting back people's emotions get talked about a lot. And we're going to talk about mirroring as part of that as well. Of course, they talk about refraining from judging, refraining from interrupting, and asking open questions in order to provide more agency and control to the patient or the person who you're talking with. All of those things are great for the most part. Generally, the goal in this conversation, again, according to Rogers, is to help people grow and change and reflect their experience back to them in order for them to get there. That's all well and good. But now let's stop and think about that for a moment. Remember, listening is a goal-oriented activity. And the research is clear. Our goals and our expectations regarding our ability to achieve those goals are going to dictate how much energy and how much focus we put into the conversation, as well as where that energy and focus is directed. Appearing to listen and actually listening are two different things. If my goal is to make sure it looks like that I'm listening, that I'm putting all of my energy and all of my focus into making sure that I'm doing things that cause you to believe that I'm listening to you, which is good. But if my goals are to gain strategically valuable information that's going to help me move the relationship and or outcome forward, now I can still show many of these same behaviors that are valuable, but while doing so, I can also stay focused on receiving, retaining, and relating the totality of the communication that I'm receiving in front of me towards these goals that I want to achieve. And if I don't have the right goals in mind at the start of the conversation, if I'm not focusing on the right things, I'm going to make that harder on myself. And if we think about this honestly, just for a moment, how many times, this might be especially true for all the parents out there, how many times have you been talking with somebody and they weren't making good eye contact, or maybe they were fidgeting, or for whatever reason, it felt like they weren't listening, they weren't paying attention. So we listening checked them. And they turn around and repeat everything that we said word for word, and then add on to the conversation, answer a question that we didn't ask, or tell us the words we were going to say next. We convinced ourselves that they weren't listening because they weren't exhibiting these traditional active listening behaviors, often starting with eye contact and open posture, but it turns out they were listening attentively the whole time. Flip side, how many times have you had a conversation with somebody? And maybe managers and executives might relate to this more. How many times have you had a conversation with somebody who has been maintaining pretty decent eye contact and open posture and sitting in front of you the whole time? They look like they've been listening. But then as time goes by, it becomes very clear that they either didn't hear a word that you said, or they didn't find it valuable enough to retain or take action on it. And think about how we feel in that situation. In the moment, it felt like they were fully engaged and they were listening, but come to find out down the road, it appears it wasn't the case. So often, these stereotypical expectations we have on good listening, physically what that looks like, doesn't actually apply to the listening that's going on inside the brain of the person sitting in front of us. So don't get me wrong, these core concepts of active listening are important. And yeah, I'm not going to disagree with the fact that if people believe you're listening to them, they're more than likely to continue to stay engaged and share more information with you. I think that's been pretty well established as a fact. The challenge now becomes, how do we provide the proper nonverbal and verbal interaction during a conversation, especially if it's a high stress conversation, especially if it's a superior subordinate conversation, especially if there's competing priorities or fears or motivations in the conversation? How do we balance that with what we need to do in order to gather the intelligence and move the relationship and the outcome forward? So if we pause again for a quick second and start thinking about some of these behaviors that are closely associated with active listening and some of the risks that are associated if we just focus on those. One of the risks we just said is violating somebody's interpretation or expectation that we did in fact listen to them. We're sitting in front of somebody, we're saying and doing all these things that we're taught to say and do to make it look like we're listening, but we're not actually retaining the information. We're not thinking of this as like a puzzle building exercise, gathering this information now and fitting it into the greater puzzle of our relationship or our initiative or whatever we're working on. When we're done, maybe we even summarize what we heard, then we walk away, flush it. We don't do anything about it. The person who did the speaking walks away and feels like we were fully engaged. We got the message. Turns out we didn't. Imagine how much more upset they're going to be a couple of days from now when they realize that we actually weren't paying close attention and what they said didn't matter enough for us to retain it and take action on it. So it's kind of a global risk. Another really important risk to consider is we deceive ourselves into believing that we listened. So by sitting in front of them and maintaining the good eye contact and the open posture and the encouragement and focusing on all of these behaviors, we deceive ourselves into believing that we captured the totality of their message in the context of the situation. Now, in fairness, maybe we got a lot of it. Honestly, maybe we did. But the more we focus on how we look and appear, the less we're actually focusing on the strategic value of everything that's happening in front of us and how we can apply it in our relationship, not just today, but tomorrow and down the road to help achieve shared goals that we have together. That risk gets a little bit compounded if we're having a conversation with somebody and I'm really just focused on looking super empathetic and engaged, which again, most of the time is a good thing. But if that's what I'm focused on, how many elemental factors around us, or environmental factors, around us, am I missing? Is the room hot? Is the room cold? In one conversation I remember quite clearly, the sun, well, I guess technically the earth had moved, right? The earth had moved, the sun's coming through a window it wasn't coming through before. It was blinding somebody, they couldn't make eye contact. One interview I had to conduct outside, the wind was blowing and the young woman I was having a conversation with was consistently turning her head down to the side, moving the hair out of her face. Are there other people in the room that might be impacting this conversation? Very early on in my career, I had to swap out witnesses because it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that the woman I was interviewing was never going to tell me the truth in front of the witness I had in the room. So I had to swap the witness out in order to get the truth. A lot of these environmental factors go out the window if I'm just sitting there saying, well, I got to make sure I keep this open posture and this eye contact and these encouragers. Again, they're good. I don't want the theme of this to be don't do those things. These things are all important, but they're really a great start. They're a foundation that we need to continue to build off of to create strategic advantages or forward movement in whatever project, initiative, problem that we're trying to work through or solve together. Another issue that we sometimes find ourselves falling into is damaging the perception of our trust and credibility if we appear to be robotic, inauthentic, or acting. A lot of times, again, not always, clearly not always, a lot of times in a therapeutic environment, when somebody is talking to a psychologist or a therapist, they've built some trust. I want to be here. Hopefully I've vetted this person or somebody's vetted them for me. I believe they can help. So I'm going to start from a place of trust. I might test it a little bit. I'm going to start from a place of trust and I'm going to move on. Often as leaders, as investigators, as HR professionals, as people, anybody who is in a superior, subordinate, or a vendor relationship, you're in a business development or a negotiation type scenario, whether we want to admit it or not, trust can start out questioned to low at best. Because somebody in this scenario has potential leverage, has the opportunity to wield consequences, to change the other person's life for the negative, whether we want to admit it or not. We talked about this before. It's easy to fall into the entitlement trap. I'm the parent. I'm the leader. I'm the sales professional selling a product that I honestly believe is going to help somebody. On and on and on. I'm the HR professional. I'm an advocate for somebody. So because this is how we see ourselves, we feel entitled to the people, the information that we ask of the people that we converse with. Unfortunately, for many of these people in subordinate positions, they have more reasons to distrust us in the beginning of the conversation as opposed to trust us in the beginning of the conversation. And when people doubt the credibility or their ability to actually trust the person that they're speaking with, at the outset of that conversation or the early stages of that conversation, they're typically not looking for a reason to trust somebody. They're looking for a reason not to trust somebody. So now, if the person in front of them appears robotic, unfortunately, it can be really hard to show emotions that we're not actually feeling. Sometimes our nonverbal behavior, facial expressions don't match our words. Sometimes we might lose fine motor control and our illustrators or body movement might seem a little kind of herky-jerky, have those stops and starts in them. Sometimes we just fall into a pattern and we keep saying the same words. Exactly, absolutely. Or maybe even worse, I understand. The more we repeat the same words, the more our behavior appears robotic or inauthentic or that we're acting, the more we're eroding trust and we don't even know it because we think we're doing all the things we're supposed to do. But the person sitting across from us says, these things don't fit, they don't match. I'm not sure how I feel about this. And we're actually creating doubt in the mind of the person that we're speaking with. And when I quickly mentioned, I understand, I know that many of us have been taught for a long time to demonstrate empathy, say, I understand. Well, a lot of times in contentious conversations, if we say to somebody, I understand, their first thought is, no, you don't. How could you? You're not in my situation. You weren't there. So while we're telling them we understand, that could actually be creating more divisiveness than creating common ground. How many times have you had a problem and called customer service? And they say, I'm sorry, I understand how inconvenient this is for you. First of all, you have nothing to be sorry for. It probably wasn't your fault. And second of all, do you really understand? Do you understand how I've been standing out here in the rain for the last 45 minutes because my rental car didn't have a spare tire in it and what this has done to my client meeting and what that means for my business? Hypothetically speaking, of course. Oftentimes when we say I understand, we feel like it's creating common ground when in fact it's doing the opposite. To the point where if somebody ever says to you, you don't understand, often one of the best responses is to look at them right in the face and sincerely say, you're right, I don't. You're right, I might not. That's a great point. Please help me understand. Please bring me up to speed. Please continue to share so I can update my understanding. All of these are generally more productive responses than telling somebody, I understand. And along that same line, I also want to talk about mirroring for a moment. And I know that mirroring behavior is something that many people talk about and many people swear by is a technique to build trust and rapport. It has worked. It can work. It can also fail spectacularly. And it's important to understand that before we just start mirroring people. So the concept behind mirroring behavior is that when people are in rapport, they automatically mirror each other's behavior. And that is true. The next time you're having a conversation with somebody and it's a great conversation and you scratch your chin or you adjust your glasses or maybe you scratch your shoulder, whatever it is, and the person sitting in front of you does the same or similar behavior, that's an immediate indication that you're almost certainly in a great state of rapport right now. That's positive. The concept of mirroring is generally used as an attempt to take that concept as a means to reverse engineer and help generate rapport where it may not already exist. So I'm having a conversation with somebody. We're outside of rapport right now. Maybe we're close. Maybe we're far. Maybe it's superior subordinate. Maybe it's vendor client. Maybe it's parent child. Maybe it's interviewer and subject or suspect or job candidate. Who knows? But we're in this relationship. We're not in rapport, but I want to be. So I shift to sit in the same posture that you are, or I change my delivery to use similar illustrations, maybe even change my word choice to use the same words that you're using in order to generate rapport. It can work. It has worked. It can also fail spectacularly because if you don't trust me and you're looking for any reason potentially not to trust me, or at least to continue feeling in a warned or suspicious state about me, and now I alter my behavior in a way that appears to be outside of my norm in an attempt to mirror yours, right now your brain clicks over and says the game is on. Maybe I'm doing this with very valid and empathetic intentions. But if the person sitting across me doesn't trust me, well, why are you changing to try to look like I look? What type of environment are you trying to create here? So it's kind of hard to talk about if it's just audio, and even on a quick video, it's hard to demonstrate. But really, in a lot of situations, what we would highly encourage that people do is they match behavior, they don't mirror it. The concept of mirroring is essentially, I do exactly what you do. The concept of matching is I do something more similar to what you do. Not immediately. So as soon as you cross your arms, I cross my arms. As soon as you take your glasses off, I take my glasses off. These are more kind of outside examples, I know. Well, maybe not the crossing the arms one. but we match it. So if I'm sitting with somebody and they cross their legs, I don't cross my legs right away, and I probably don't even cross them the exact same way. But later on, as I'm illustrating and gesturing my way through the conversation, maybe I shift my posture in my seat, and at a natural point in time, I cross my legs in a way that's comfortable for me. If we match behavior as opposed to mirror behavior, we do a better job maintaining authenticity. It creates less suspicion, and in many ways, it can still have a similar impact. So as much as we should be careful saying, I understand, we should be careful mirroring as well. One more specific place to be careful, paraphrasing. If we are in rapport, if we have a great relationship, if we believe we're on the same page, and I paraphrase, I don't say it exactly the way you say it. I don't use the specific words that you used. It's my interpretation of what I just heard. It's what I just heard, right? Not what you just said. My interpretation of what I just heard. Then, okay, that's cool. But if we're not in rapport, if we don't have trust, if there is any contentiousness in the relationship, if we do have competing goals, superior, subordinate, all these examples, now when I do that, people again could be looking for a reason to disagree, not agree. That's not what I said. You're twisting my words. You didn't mention this. I didn't say it like that. I'm sure many of us have gotten responses like this over time. When our genuine attempt to show that we have been actively listening, at least in the moment, maybe not permanently, kind of blows up in our face, where they think this is a technique we're using to move them into a different box. And we're not trying to do that. That's not where we're trying to go at all. So if we are going to paraphrase, because it can be a very valuable technique, if we are going to paraphrase, if we are going to summarize, make sure we're not just saying things like, so what I heard was, which is good. That's certainly better than saying what you said was. What I heard was. It could be, so what I believe I understand. What I believe I heard was in the context relating to. Even pose it as a question. So did I hear correctly that? Am I wrong to believe or understand this? 1,000 other options out there. But just make sure that when we do paraphrase, if there's any doubt in the relationship at that moment in time, that we do so in a way that makes it obvious we're not saying it word for word. We're not trying to twist what the other person said, and we're actually taking the extra step to make sure they still feel like they have control or agency in the conversation, which again is one of these key kind of underlying concepts of active listening, which is great. If somebody feels like they have more agency, they have more control, they can generally be more honest because they feel less threatened. All of those things are good. So if we start to think back again through those standard behaviors related to active listening, they all have positive opportunities. Many of them also carry some risks as well. If we're having a conversation with somebody who just wants to feel heard, we're having a conversation with somebody who just wants us to listen, like a therapeutic environment where reflecting back what somebody said and what somebody felt can help them arrive at their own solution. Active listening is awesome. If we're having a conversation with somebody where trust becomes a little bit more of an issue, competing priorities, fears, agendas, on become more of an issue, and we need to take meaningful action. Now we need to go back to considering that listening is a goal-oriented activity. We need to go back and clarify our goals, short-term and long-term. What are my goals for this situation? Short-term and long-term, not just this conversation, but if this conversation was a rock and I threw it into a lake, all of those ripple effects that are going to come out. What are my goals? Now, to achieve those goals, how do I consider what my audience, my counterpart, really needs to experience in this conversation? While I'm engaged, how do I elevate my situational awareness so I can be more in tune to the environmental factors, more in tune to how I'm impacting what this person is sharing or not sharing, certainly all the nuances of their verbal and nonverbal communication in the context of the situation, and then how do I start pulling out strategically valuable information that I can put into this never-ending puzzle I'm building in order to move the relationship and the initiative forward and closer to achieving the goals. It's very hard to know what could be strategically valuable in any conversation if we're not clear on the goals we're trying to achieve. If the goals we're trying to achieve are look like we're listening, cool. If the goals we're trying to achieve is to trying to really understand what somebody is thinking and feeling, how those thoughts and emotions are impacting their perception of the alternatives, which is therefore impacting their actions, And now we want to begin to show them a new path so we can demonstrate new value, help them explore new opportunities and move forward. We're going to do more than just make sure we look like we're listening. And in any of these types of interactions, we have to be aware enough to adapt our approach as we move on. That might call for more eye contact, less eye contact, might involve us getting closer, might involve creating a little bit more physical space. It might involve changing the room or the people involved in the conversation. Maybe it means taking what we thought was going to be a one conversation process and turning it into a 2 or 3 conversation process. Maybe we're not going to talk about it face to face as much. Maybe we'll shift to email or video or another way to have this conversation to accomplish our goals. Once we're clearly have identified our goals, the people we need to achieve them with, and the context of the situation, then we can start creating a conversational strategy that's more than likely to get us there. These traditional approaches to active listening can and often should be a part of that approach. But if we're just relying on being an active listener, reflecting back people's emotions and making it obvious that we're listening to them, often we're falling short. Yes, that's certainly part of it, but often in a lot of the relationships that we need to apply a higher level of engagement to, it's not going to be enough to get us where we need to go. So again, hopefully that was a hot take free conversation. We're not saying right or wrong. We just want to start having the conversation to allow people to consider, what do we really need to do to close the gap from where I am now to where I want to be with all the people involved in that process. And if we focus on that, we can be more strategic, we can be more aware, we can capture more information, we can make better decisions, and we can probably solve problems faster. But a lot of that involves, I probably should have chose 2 different words to say there, right? A lot of that involves evolving beyond some of these traditional concepts and adapting to meet the challenges that we're facing. I really appreciate you listening to another one of our episodes. Thank you so very much. We really appreciate you coming back week after week and supporting the show. Please, before you go, leave your feedback, especially for this one. I can imagine the feedback's going to be all over the board, and I look forward to those conversations. I sincerely do. Leave us your thoughts and feedback. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show, share it with your network, like the show. We appreciate all the time and support. Look forward to continuing the conversation next week. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.